The guys are going to introduce themselves, but the first topic this morning is looking at Rai's archive and new exploitation and associated risk in podcast production. Are you wanting the mic, or are you doing this one?
You got this one.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Arizona. My name is Gabriele, and I know it sounds like a female name, but I don't know what my parents were thinking. And this is my colleague Andrea, which is also a female name. But this has nothing to do with what we are going to talk today. We are from Rai and the Rights Management Department. We are going to explain to you and talk to you about how we deal when we have requests for footage to be used in podcast, which is something quite new for us because we haven't been doing this for too long. Also, we are going to read because it's really boring and technical stuff, and we are going to switch between us like back-to-back DJs. So let's back from the beginning. Okay. The word podcast was introduced in 2004, and it comes from the fusion of two terms, iPod and broadcast. And the word means personal option digital casting. Today, podcasts are listened by more than 464 million people, a number expected to reach 505 million, which is a huge number, by the end of 2024. And the average user spends 7 hours a week connected to various podcast apps, which myself, I'm not an avid podcast consumer, but I think this number is correct because I myself spend a lot of time listening to podcasts while biking. The podcast market is an industry worth over 23 billion, but this growth is expected to reach over 100 billion before 2030. In Rai, podcasts can be listened to on Rai Play Sound. Rai Play Sound is a free multimedia platform dedicated to Rai's radio offering, managed by Rai Play, the Italian subscription video on-demand streaming service owned by Rai, and the Digital and Transmedia Content Department, and supported by various Rai editorial structures. The platform was launched in December 2017. On the homepage, there are 12 radio channels, information about the content of radio programs, and all the other original content. Rai Play Sound is continuously expanding in terms of content and access. And now we will see the results for 2024 up to March, provided by Rai Digital, which manages the platform.
Well, so the monthly average between January and February 2024 of unique accesses of Rai Play Sound is 1.34 million, with more than 240,000 active registered users per month. The average number of monthly streams, live plus audio on demand, is over 6 million, and there are 15.9 million page views. The monthly average of active registered users is 248,000, a plus 7% increase compared to the monthly average of active registered users in the same period of 2023. A plus 37% monthly average of active registered users in the same period of 2023, 3.8 million monthly average audio on-demand streams, 15.9 million monthly average page views, a plus 15% monthly average of active registered users in the same period of 2023. So, the Rai Play Sound catalog is constantly enriched and currently includes over 1,200 titles for a total of more than 80,000 individual audio contents. The catalog is divided into over 30 genres, ranging from sports to science, entertainment to art, economics, and content for children. Let's see the total number of catalog, it's 1,254. And there are some titles from radio programming, titles from TV schedule, and also audiobooks 222. So Rai Play Sound offers its audiences not only live broadcasts of all Rai radio channels and the possibility to listen to their favorite radio programs again, but also original content with podcasts that range from entertainment to storytelling, from current events to music. So the number of registered users has increased from 570,000 on February the 1st, 2022 to 1.2 million on March the 1st, 2024. Most of these podcasts use archives that need to be authorized for this new type of exploitation, and our rights management department is responsible for verifying the rights of the audiovisual material present in the Rai multimedia catalog before any other use. And this is also the work we do when producing new podcasts. In this presentation, we will show you how we operate and what challenges and risks are involved in this type of verification. As the Rai Tech management department, we must respond to rights clearance requests before any use of archival material.
So when we talk about podcasts, we need to understand what type of podcasts we are referring to. We generally divide them in 3 categories. The first one is adaptation of radio programs, and this involves the reproposing of radio programs on the Rai Play Sound platform in their complete version, both current and past. The second one is the transposition of television programs into audio format, and this is the case of podcasts that offer programs to be listened to by uploading only the audio track on the Rai Play Sound platform. And the third one, the most complicated one, is the elaboration of radio and or television programs. And this involves recreating new audio content by using past and or present programs as footage to develop a new podcast. So how are rights managed in these cases? What do the contracts provide? Do the clauses always help us defining the rights needed to elaborate or rework such works? Might we encounter issues that require new interpretation, thus taking on the risk of a personal evaluation? So these are some of the questions we have asked ourselves and as the rights management department when faced with the request to use radio and TV products from our multimedia catalog to create podcasts. The first element to consider is the type of contracts that we are examining. So we have total procurement and co-productions, and generally these two do not present particular problems. Total procurement involves the transfer of all the works rights to Rai, while the co-production contracts stipulates that Rai owns, if not all, a large part of the rights to the work, possibly with a territorial division with the co-producer. On the other hand, purchase and pre-purchase contracts present a more complicated situation. In most cases, these are licenses and not transfers. For example, the rights remain with the original holder. Therefore, each individual proposal must be evaluated to determine what use will be made of the material, whether it is for internal Rai use or for commercialization. It is evident that the use of archival material for internal Rai use presents a lower risk. Besides the nature of the contracts, we must also consider the time period in which the clauses were stipulated. First group that we divided our work in includes contracts signed by Rai between 1994, which is the year Italian TV was born, and 1980. During this period, Rai functioned solely as a broadcaster, and consequently, the contractual clauses only included radio and television rights. because no other uses were foreseeable at the time. For example, if we take a 1968 contract for the famous variety show Canzonissima, we can read the following clause. Free television broadcasting for free use for radio broadcasting purposes. Radio, television, and broadcasting. Even in 1977, the contract for a radio drama included the clause free total or partial use for radio broadcasting purposes, radio, television, and wired broadcasting in Italy and abroad, of the production and the related recording by any means. In these cases, there is no doubt about the nature of the permitted use. Such archival material cannot be used to create podcast, thus applying a restrictive interpretation of the contract. However, there have been cases where a more open interpretation was adopted, especially when dealing with the journalistic investigation program from this period. This is the case with the original Rai Play Sound podcast titled Gli archivi della follia, The Archives of Madness. The podcast traces the crucial steps that led to a change in cultural perspective on mental illness up to the promulgation of the 1978 law, known in Italy as the Basaglia Law, named after the famous Italian psychiatrist Franco Basaglia, who was the promoter of psychiatric reform in Italy. And the podcast is presented as a journey inside the Rai archive and uses archival material, predominantly journalistic investigations, which were considered usable in the podcast due to the importance of the subject matter. The second, The second time frame is from 1980 to 1990. Contracts signed by Rai starting from the 80s extended the exploitation clauses for commercial purposes for the first time, including, among others, home video and cinematographic rights. So if we are asked to verify repertoires from Rai programs produced in these years, always referring to the 4 types of contracts we saw before, total procurement, co-production, and pre-purchase or purchase, we can interpret the contracts more broadly when the exploitation is requested for an internal production. However, if the request comes from a third parties, we remain more cautious and refer the clearance to the rights to the client through RaiCom, which is our commercial department. So here's an example of a contract with a broad formula, a contract signed for a show called Bella d'Estate of 1987. In the contractual clause states, Rai may freely use this work in Italy or abroad in any form or manner without limitation of space and time within the scope of commercial, editorial, audiovisual, discographic activities, and the like. This wording for us appears sufficiently broad to include the rights for Rai to produce a podcast if the request comes from an internal Rai production.
So, even in contracts signed in the 90s, the wording used in the contractual texts of that period is broad enough to allow an extensive interpretation of exploitation within podcasts. For example, we can see, let's consider this contract, 1991 contract, for the program Il mio mondo è qui, a story based on the American writer, poet, and journalist Dorothy Parker. Here the wording is broader. Rai may freely use this work in Italy or abroad in any form or manner without limitation of space and time within the scope of commercial, editorial, audiovisual, discographic activities, including but not limited to home video, cable TV, and satellite TV. So as can be seen, the formula includes home video rights and even references to cable and satellite TV. So there is no doubt about an extensive interpretation of the clause, making it reasonable to believe that Rai can produce podcasts. So another interesting example of podcast that taps into Rai's archives of the 90s is Non aprite I cassetti del potere. This podcast takes listeners on a journey through the Rai archives to recount the Mani Pulite investigation and the bribery scandal that erupted in Milan in 1992. This podcast brings the past back to life by reconstructing the events, judicial mechanisms, and stories that were part of the news at the time. So the reconstruction of the events was entrusted to the voices of narrators and to material of the time, including news reports, investigation, and excerpts from trial hearings. As mentioned, since this was original Rai investigative material, the nature of the archive allowed use of the footage. However, for the audio tracks of the court hearings, the rights originally granted by the president of the court for television broadcast only were renegotiated and granted for the creation of the podcast. So, from 2000 to today, contracts have changed again, and the internet has emerged on the scene, and television has begun producing programs for digital platforms as well. From a simple broadcaster, Rai has begun the process of becoming a digital media company. In this scenario, contractual clauses have also adapted to these changes, and the most recent contracts include specific rights for the creation of podcasts. In particular, as mentioned above, in the case of total procurement contracts, which grant Rai all the rights, and co-production contracts, where a significant portion of the rights belong to Rai, there are no issues with recognizing the use of the material to create podcasts. For the other categories, such as pre-purchase or purchase rights, if the clauses include radio rights that also cover an on-demand version, whether free or paid in streaming or downloading, thus granting a 100% radio rights without any specific limitations, we consider all uses of the audio tracks possible. And apart from the process of separating the audio track from the video medium when creating a new product, the editing right, the use of the segment audio and video to create a new product is also required. So for current contracts, this is a codified and easily identifiable right, while for older documents dating back to the 80s or earlier, it would seem to be an additional stretch. So regarding the right to edit, the rights management department has made an interpretative effort in this direction during the project to digitize the documentation in the Rai archives, such as contracts, releases, constraints, and or limitations. In reviewing these documents with the goal of a new certification in the current rights management system, the Rights Management Department addressed the issue or writing contracts signed to produce Rai's internal production, such as dramas, variety shows, investigation, etc. As we have mentioned, these contracts, all signed between the 50s and the 90s, only included radio and television rights. Therefore, to adapt to the new exploitation dictated by Rai's progressive transformation into a media company, and in agreement with the Legal Affairs Department, we have extended the radio and television rights provided for in these writing contracts to include editing rights. This has broadened the range of possible uses of Rai archives material in creating new works with particular attention to podcasts. It should be noted, however, that especially in text from 90s onwards, the additional rights held by Rai that supplement the necessary multimedia and radio rights must also be evaluated and analyzed. Well, in addition to our rights clearance requests, there are also those carried out by the department that deals with relations with collecting societies and therefore the authorization to be requested from authors for the authorial aspects related to reuse of television programs, either in full or in excerpts from which the audio track is extracted. The Copyright Office manages relations with the collecting societies and signs the relevant licenses for internal Rai exploitation, while everything verified for external use, such as sale to third parties, is the responsibility of the requester. Rai verifies licenses, the rights and materials, but does not handle the authorial aspects. And in conclusion, we want to mention another tool that could assist in interpreting contracts when the exploitation of the work for creating podcasts is not explicitly provided for, the so-called fair use. The fair use doctrine has an Anglo-Saxon origins, particularly in the United States, and under certain conditions allows the use of copyrighted material without requiring the authorization of the work's owner. The principle of fair use applies to products of research, criticism, education, or news reporting. So in Italy, there is no equivalent law to fair use. However, our copyright law, dated 1941, provides the right to summarize, quote, or reproduce excerpts or parts of works for the purpose of criticism, discussion, teaching, or scientific research without the need for explicit authorization. And jurisprudence has clarified that this use can also occur for non-free purposes, provided it does not constitute plagiarism.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got a few minutes to take questions if anyone wants to ask. And I'll just say they were great DJs, weren't they? You needed to be at the beginning to get that one. Any questions? At the back. Excellent.
Hi, hello. My name is Goranka, coming from Serbia. Thank you for the great presentation. It's very nice to see this issue about the rights in the podcasting. So what do you think, how you will manage the thing when the liberalization of the podcast scene, indie scene, not the people who are working for the Rai, for the people who want to use something from the Rai archives and they are independent podcast producers? How are you managing that thing? From the behalf of the citizens of the Italy, or they are around the world, so they want something from the archives, or it's on the paid, or it's on the fair use. What is your opinions? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. But basically what we do is that we analyze who asked it and for what's the purpose of the exploitation they need. If it's for like personal use, it's a department. If it's for like educational use, we have another department dealing with that. If it's for commercial use, let's say you want to do a podcast and publish it on Spotify and stuff, what you should do is ask our commercial department to go through all the protocols for you to pay for the material you want to use. Actually, while we were studying for this speech, we discovered that it's not something really common for us to be asked for podcast exploitations. And this is why we realized that there are so many podcasts out there that use Rai's archive without no one knowing it. So we should definitely improve our way of dealing with this stuff. But that's a promise, we will do it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Breed.
Hi, Breed Dooley from RTE. I'm interested to know, in renegotiating older contracts, what are the main obstacles you've come up against? Has it cost a lot of money to do so? And are there times when you just walk away?
We don't have a lot of margin to work with, especially if there are older contracts that we are, most of the time we are forced to say it's not possible, the exploitation. it could be so old that it's already in public domain. So in that case, we don't deal too much. Even though if the request comes for a commercial use, we still say no. We don't allow the use of that. But we refer the client, in this case, to deal with the rights and with the owner, with the original owner, or the gli eredi, I don't know what's the English for, the heritage of the sounds and yeah. So if it's an old material that we don't have explicit in the contract the possibility to use it, we say we cannot use it. Yeah. But if it's for an internal use, we are more. Yeah, we can use it if it's not something like, I don't know, a work of music or art. But if it's like a journalistic thing, we say we can use it.
Thank you. We've probably got time for one more question.
Hi. So I'm wondering, with the advent of AI and LLMs, if especially with co-productions and even like licensing content from third parties, if you're seeing some special clauses to cover AI training, let's say for Rai's benefit only, or if you can sub-license some of those AI rights to third parties, or this isn't even a thing right now, like you're not getting enough demand from, let's say, companies to train their models, or even internally to train your own models, right?
Really, I don't know. I don't think we had any requests in that direction, and I have no idea how Rai is dealing with AI at the moment. I do know there are people working on it, but I don't think we had any request of like a company who wants our material to train the AI. At least I never received one, so I don't know. I don't even know if it's a thing.
Okay. I've just got one sneaky question at the end. You mentioned that sometimes in your contracts you might have overseas rights outside of Italy. Are the podcasts available outside of Italy, and do you have examples where sometimes you're not enabled to do that?
It depends. Normally, Rai Play Sound has a geo-blocked mechanism, so you can't hear it outside of Italy. Mm-hmm. And then it depends on the right. Maybe in the case of total rights to Rai, maybe sometimes, and it depends also it depends on the agreement from Rai and the client or the. So normally it's geo-blocked. Yep. Apart some specific authorization.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. We're going to have a short handover, but if we could all say thank you to the guys.